Hey, 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 how is it going today? Happy Friday. We are getting ready to do a little bit more with Industrial Strength Magic by Macronomicon. So, if you have been here checking this out, you know that we have completed chapter 1 and chapter 2, and we're moving on to chapter 3 today. And we're going to do a bit of cold reading if you're not familiar. So I have not pre-read this. This is my pre-read of the book, and we're checking out kind of the tone, the characters, what we're doing with it, learning a bit about it, maybe some of the odd and awkward words that we might have to encounter, and playing along with that. So if you enjoy that kind of stuff, you might want to stick around. Um, if you do have any questions or anything that you would like to comment on as I move everything around in my screen, you're more than welcome to ask those questions, and we will get to them, hopefully, as soon as we can. So, yeah, we left off our intrepid Perry hero with him finding out that he finally got some magic going, but all it is tinker stuff, and he's like super annoyed because he doesn't want to have to be a tinker. His dad, I believe, is a tinker, so that works out kind of obviously for him. And his dad's also a supervillain, and his mom is a superhero, and they are arch nemesis. And it led to some really hilarious stuff. Mac is always full of great comedy, great pop culture references, and some really interesting, fun, exciting magic systems. So I can't wait to find out more about this one. Let's go. Okay, so we're at chapter 3. This is class selection. Nice. Predictably, there was no magic, Tinker. Thanks, Dad. Perry cruised through the classes, through the glasses. Perry cruised through the classes, the system reacting intuitively to his desire to navigate it. Tinker. The basis of every tinker, unlikely to excel at any particular strategy, but without any glaring weaknesses. Perks. Tinker Twitch. User modestly offers, this font is really weird on this, and it's very thick, and so it's like bleed through on these words. It's hard to read in this bold. User modestly alters reality as they make their creation, makes Tinker Tech difficult to replicate or steal with performance that beggars belief, often only works for the Tinker in question, with a few exceptions. Generalist, +4 free points per level. Per level, HP +2, body +1, stability +1, nerve +2, attunement +1, free points 5. Choose Tinker, yes or no? No. Let's look at the next one, Perry thought, moving on to the next class. Space Tinker, the tinker who dreams of space. This specialist has benefits to various tech necessary for space travel. Perks. Tinker Twitch. User modestly alters reality as they make their creation. Makes Tinker Tech difficult to replicate or steal with performance that beggars belief. Often only works for the tinker in question, with a few exceptions. That's the Tinker Twitch. Envirotech. Any self-contained life support system or self-contained environment is automatically drastically more robust and fail-safe than it might otherwise be. Advanced propulsion systems. More easily design and fabricate advanced propulsion navigation systems, accumulating in warp speed FTL. Per level. +1 HP, 0 body, stability +2, nerve +3, attunement +1, free points 1. Okay, Perry thought, thumbing his chin. The answer here is obvious. Perry dismissed the whole list and backed out. I have no idea what the stats do, so I need to look that up. Perry then focused his attention on his status and each individual stat. Body. Increases the body's strength/speed and resistance to damage, including poison and disease, longevity and healing. Each point multiplies the user's neutral qualities by, 1.05, compounding. Okay, so if it's compounding, Then compounding, I think if it's compounding, then use the rule of 72. 72 divided by 5 equals 14.4. About 14 to 15 levels of body will double physical attributes, 22 to triple them, 28 to quadruple, etc., etc. With 31 times stats at 100 body. Next stat. Stability increases the mind's natural resistance to damage from trauma, depression, psi powers. Magic includes resistance to mind control. Maybe I should read depression, psi powers. Magic includes resistance to mind control, both powers based and magical. Each point multiplies the user's natural qualities by 1.05 compounding. Simple enough. Next, nerve. Increases the performance of nerve cells through the body, increases the user's senses, reaction time, learning, intelligence, and coordination. Each point multiplies the user's natural ability by 1.05 compounding. I'm feeling a theme with this 1.05 compounding. I always kind of like it when an author does this. Uh, it's hard to do because you're doing a bit of an info dump, but it's also a little bit necessary because every system can be slightly different. And so you might have these terms that are used interchangeably, but might mean slightly different things like nerve and stability and intelligence and attunement, all that kind of stuff. And so knowing what they specifically uh, affect or do is quite helpful sometimes, especially if you're wanting to bring in new readers or new listeners who aren't as familiar with gaming and they're like, I don't know what that means. This kind of gives them a basis to help them understand what that's about. So, yeah, I like that. All righty then, let's get back into it. Next, attunement. Part of Claudette's hippie bullshit. Attunes the user to the tide. Multiplies the power of class perks by 1.05 compounding. Perry's brows rose. That's interesting. He went back to the class list and began narrowing down what he wanted and why. He spent an entire day at school copying down the different classes and doing long-winded cost-benefit analysis in his notebook while the lessons flew by. Eventually, he narrowed it down to 3, and finally, with a great deal of regret, Perry dismissed AI Tinker and Industrial Tinker, leaving one of the more lackluster choices, but perfect for Carrie. For Carrie. Oh yeah, Carrie. Leaving one of the more lackluster choices, but perfect for Perry. Garage Tinker. Garage Tinker. A garage tinker is a master of making the most of limited resources, patching together small projects that punch above their weight class. Perks. Tinker Twitch. User modestly alters reality as they make their creation. Makes Tinker tech difficult to replicate or steal with performance that beggars belief. Often only works with the tinker in question, with a few exceptions. Pretty familiar with that one now. Spendthrift. Load-bearing structures and armors are stronger than they should be. Reactions are more powerful at lower concentrations. Contaminants have less impact on the finished product, and materials/components behave as if they were more expensive alternatives. Sounds pretty good. Generalist, +2 free points per level. HP +1, a body +1, stability +1, nerve +2, attunement +2, free points 3. Dang, yeah, that one's a lot better, hey? My goodness. The reason Perry begrudgingly chose Garage Tinker over AI Tinker, which promised loyal AI servants, or Industrial Tinker, which guaranteed wealth and power, was the Spendthrift perk. Specifically, reactions are more powerful at lower concentrations, and materials/components behave as if they were more expensive alternatives. Though both of those phrases seem to suggest that they might increase the potency of magic rituals, which is what he wants. He wants that magic. It didn't say chemical reactions. It didn't say chemical reactions. It just said reactions. It didn't specify what kind of materials or components would be improved, just a blanket statement. If magical ingredients fell under that blanket, which Perry suspected they would, then the perk literally increased the potency of magic cast by any tech he created. It was a bit of a gamble, but Perry wasn't too terribly concerned with it. Any tinker would inevitably become rather wealthy if they lived long enough, and the garage tinker promised that he could get by on cheap parts for a long time, meaning his startup costs would be negligible compared to another tinker. And he could still make an AI, and using cheaper parts, just not as good as a specialist. So even if this was a mistake, Perry wouldn't suffer too badly. Probably. Choose garage tinker? Yes or no? Yes. Perry wobbled in place as a strange tingle spread through his body and mind, not quite pins and needles. Like his entire brain had fallen asleep. A minute later, the tingles faded and he was left alone with his thoughts and the system. Congratulations! You are now a level 1 garage tinker. Paradox, we were talking about this one, his name, Zauberer. Paradox Zauberer, Perry Z. Class, Garage Tinker. Level 1, HP 2, because he already had an HP from before. Body 1, Stability 1, Nerve 2, Attunement 2, XP to next level, 1,245. Current quest, do your homework. Of course. Reward 5 XP. All right, now what do I need to do? Your homework. Perry now needed to figure out some kind of numerical representation for the spendthrift perk's effect on a spell, if any, as well as the effect it had on other designs. Now, how am I going to do that? Perry thought, rubbing his chin. In order to figure out how much difference the perk made, he needed a control sample, preferably someone he knew didn't have magical or tinker powers, or powers of any kind. Someone suitably stupid who wouldn't think too hard about why they were doing what they were doing, but also agreeable and eager to do science under the right circumstances. Aha! Oh, that's unfortunate when you immediately come up with someone that you think is so stupid that they won't figure out what's going on but are eager and agreeable. Everyone has to have that kind of friend, hey? The next day, yo, Brendan! And clearly it must be Brendan. Poor Brendan. Perry said, sliding into a seat beside the jock. Ooh, he's a jock. Sup, Z? Brendan asked, his meat hooks wrapped around one of the massive tuna sandwiches his mom made for him. You want to do some science at my place? What kind of science? Brendan asked, with a hint of suspicion. What kind of science? More like that. The fun kind, Perry said, with what he hoped was a conspiratorial smile. The fun kind? More like that, I think. He leaned in closer and lowered his voice. Do you know my dad has an indoor gun range? How would you like to try a prawn gun? The kind they use on the wall. Awesome. Say no more, I'm in, Brendan said, his voice disappearing into the general chaos of the cafeteria. Or at least Perry thought it had disappeared. You're in what? Heather said, sitting down beside Brendan and eyeballing Perry. Shit, Heather's not stupid. No, she's not. There was a good chance that Heather would put two and two together and realize that Perry had a superpower now. It wouldn't be super obvious what it was, but she would get suspicious. But at the same time, Perry had just tried to extend an olive branch last week, and if he snubbed her now, out of some misguided attempt at secrecy, she was probably going to go, she was probably going to go right back to being his nemesis. Not that she'd completely come around, but her just being here was a big step, as normally she didn't bother to sit down within 2 tables of Perry. While Perry was agonizing over his choices, Brendan made it for him. We're gonna go shoot some stuff at his dad's indoor range. You wanna come? Brendan asked, around a huge bite of tuna and mayo. Perry bit his lip as Heather's emerald gaze pinned him to the chair. Yeah, you wanna come? She deliberated for a moment, then gave a languid shrug. Sure. I gotta trade off custody for our super baby anyway. How'd that happen? Brendan asked. I didn't think either of you had superpowers. It's Mr. Rogers, Perry said. You and Mr. Rogers? He asked, staring at Heather. I mean, I could see that. I guess he's pretty cool for a teacher, but isn't that illegal? Do you enjoy playing dumb or what? Heather asked, resting her chin on her palm and glaring at someone else for once. Brendan took an... Oh, the pressure's off. Brendan stuck his foot in it. Brendan took another slow bite of his sandwich, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. Oh, this guy is just super smart, isn't he? So, Mr. Rogers has superpower now? He asked. You know what? I would be glad to join you guys at the range, Heather said, changing the subject with a bright smile that spelled doom for all who opposed her. Brendan still looked confused, which was ideal. Hey, Dad! Barry yelled down the bright white hall that led to his dad's primary lab. What? Dad yelled, ducking his head out of the room, welding goggles perched on top of his oversized forehead. His oversized forehead. Can I borrow some guns? Perry yelled. Tinker or conventional? His dad yelled back, his voice echoing down the hall. Conventional! Knock yourself out! Dad shouted. I mean, how often do 17, I think, 17, 18-year-olds just go, hey, Dad, I need some guns. Which guns do you need? Do you want the tinker ones or conventional ones? He's like, regular guns. I want real guns. And your dad's like, yeah, you bet. Knock yourself out. Just make sure you clean them before you put them back. Gotcha. Brendan stood there, his eyes wide. I would be eyed wide too. What a dad. He is a villain. I mean, let's be fair. Heather looked significantly less impressed, which made sense given her dad's occupation. Your dad is so freaking cool, he whispered. Your dad is so freaking cool, Brendan whispered reverentially. Give it time, Perry said, waving Brendan and Heather toward the armory. Perry entered the code and the door slid open to reveal arm's bliss. There were a lot of guns, with multiple copies of each kind, from 22 varmint, I might have to look those up to find out how that is, varmint rifles all the way up to the prawn gun, which was essentially a modified Nitro Express. Don't know what a Nitro Express is. Is that a real thing or is that a made-up thing for this book? And that wasn't even including the lasers, plasma rifles, sonic lances, etc. The real dangerous stuff was stored separately, the actual dangerous stuff, opposed to all the other guns. But dangerous was relative, as any one of these guns would kill a non-powered individual just fine. Is this legal? Some of them may be legal, but it's not enforced. Or some of them may be illegal, but it's not enforced, Perry said, grabbing a nearby cart and placing a couple of different pistols and rifles of varying caliber, from the 22 to the 7, how do you say that one? I'm so bad with this. I'm a Canadian. I don't know enough about guns, apparently. 7.62, the 762, maybe? And because he'd promised another thing we got to look up, he added the prawn rifle to the bottom of the cart. Heather watched what Perry grabbed and picked out boxes of appropriate ammo on the fly. Wow, she knows her guns. Okay, cool. Brendan didn't think to wonder why. Heather knew what ammo went to what gun, which was exactly why he was here. What do you mean not enforced? Brendan asked. This has got to be... Listen, Brendan, Perry said, putting his arm over the Ox's shoulder. Listen, Brendan. I think that's how he would say it. When supers started running around, what do you think happened to the demand for guns? It went up? It went down, Brendan. Because the guns weren't working. Nobody wanted a weapon some rando in tights could ignore, and their value tanked. Some people, like my dad, would wound up buying a bunch of them as collector's items to use for target practice as a hobby. The law overlooks this too because the law is supers. They have super strength, tinker tech that sheds most conventional rounds like water off a duck's back, so they don't care if a private citizen has a little more ammo than normal or have conventional guns with no serial number. You think they're worried about an unregistered AK-47 when the Mechonaut has lasers that can melt city blocks? Heather snorted, trying to hold in her laughter. I guess not, Brendan said, nodding. Oh, Brendan, you're so smart. 706, thank you. Thank you so much. This is why I love doing these lives like this, because I get people that help so much. 706. Cool. Okay. We're back here to Perry escorted them to the shooting range where he'd set up dozen upon dozens of ballistic gelatin dummies. Oh, yeah. Science is all about controlling as many variables as possible, then only changing one at a time, so you knew what caused the change, if any. If that meant Perry and his friends got to stand there and unload AK-47s on dummies to establish control, then all the better. After each volley, Perry went downrange and noted exactly how deep each bullet from each person went through the gelatin. Perry was a bit disappointed to see the gun he held did not shoot with more penetrative power than the others. It seemed, excuse me, it seemed that spendthrift only applied to things he had created or assembled himself. Note to self, tear gun down and reassemble to see if there's an uptick in performance. Bullets too? Once the control was established, it was time to science. Let's science, everybody. This, lady and gentlemen, is several brand new types of materials my dad just invented, Perry said, revealing last night's creations with a flourish. It was a variety of simple breastplates he'd made out of plywood, plastic, aluminum cans, compact dirt, and plexiglass, fitting snugly on top of their respective ballistics gel. Your dad made a new kind of plywood? Heather asked, brow raised. Yeah, he did. Shut up. That's awesome. Heather's expression clearly indicated she didn't believe him. He made a new kind of dirt, too? Is this like terracotta or something? Oh, wait, that's Brendan, sorry. He made a new kind of dirt, too? Is this like terracotta or something? Brendan asked, poking the dirt breastplate. It's dirt, Perry said. Just gotta have variety so you can get more data, you know? Oh, okay. Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Brendan nodded. Heather looked suspicious. She's just getting more and more suspicious. Anyway, over here we have the controls, Perry said, moving on to unveiling the sheets of unprocessed material. On the cart were sheets of plywood, plastic, empty aluminum cans, plexiglass, and a sack of dirt. Perry had avoided directly touching them, nor made them into armor. So hopefully they still had their natural resilience. Who's ready to do some more science? Perry asked. What's really going on here, Perry? Heather asked, her arms crossed. You want to shoot some guns or not? Perry said, tone flat. Ooh, I do, Brendan said, waving his hand in the air. Oh, Perry, you're surrounding yourself with such gems. Yeah, definitely would be good to get a cheat sheet on ought versus O versus point, both in American and British context. Jeff might have something, or Travis. That's definitely a possibility. Dun, dun, dun. Next chapter. Maths. Let's see how far we should be able to finish this chapter for today, and then we will come back on Monday. Okay, let's get going. This is maths. They had a great time blowing holes in Perry's new materials. Nothing was safe. And once the dummies were thoroughly shredded, Perry broke out the prawn gun. Brendan, the beefy young man who weighed at least 220 pounds, got knocked on his ass, cradling a bruised collarbone after the first shot. The anti-prawn ordnance exploded the armor. The dummy behind it, and sorry, let me see this again. Okay, the anti-prawn ordnance exploded the armor, the dummy behind it, and tore a huge chunk out of the self-healing backdrop Barry's dad had installed. Woohoo! Brendan cheered weakly, still holding a shoulder. You're not doing it right, Heather said, holding the gun as tight to her shoulder as possible, aiming and firing. Heather didn't fall down, but she did stumble backwards, trying to stop herself until she slammed into the wall. Really, she weighs half as much as Brendan. What was she thinking? Your turn, Heather said, offering Perry the enormous rifle. I know my limits, Perry said, and I'd rather not break my collarbone. Come on, man, Brendan shouted. Yeah, come on, Heather said with a mischievous grin. Do it. Do it, do it, do it, the two cretins chanted. If it'll get them off my back, it might be worth a broken collarbone. Perry sighed. Let it not be said that I am immune to peer pressure, he said, taking the rifle and popping out the spent shells. Woohoo! Brendan. Brendan shouted. Perry admired the cartridges for a moment. They were thicker than his thumb and as long as his hand. The bullet portion had depleted uranium in a lead jacket to protect the barrel. In short, they were freaking huge, and it only served to reinforce exactly how dangerous the monsters on the wall really were. These bullets were not meant to be used for practice, Heather, you minx. He wasn't really getting viable data from these guns anyway, since everything they hit either exploded or didn't. There was very little in between. Perry loaded the next shot and took aim, taking special care to brace the gun tightly. He meant it when he said that he didn't want a broken collarbone. Boom! It was at that moment that an invisible 100th Dan ninja jumped down from the ceiling and power kicked him in the shoulder. Ah! Perry's voice was lost in the chaos as he was propelled backwards, flying through the air a handful of feet before he hit the ground, sliding until his crown nudged up against the back wall of the firing range. How you doing? Heather asked, her hair creating a fire. I think this is supposed to be, is it creating or creating a fiery halo around her head as she bent over him. And it was at that moment that Perry was tempted to drop his remaining free points in body, if only to show up Heather's cocky smirk. But no, Heather's dad was a gun magnate. It could be assumed that he'd supplied both sides of the law, and it was no fault of Perry's that she knew how to handle a prawn gun. Fine, Heather wins, Perry said, holding up the rifle for whoever wanted to take the next shot. Let's see if this thing can break my collarbone, Brendan said, taking the gun out of his hands. This guy's an idiot. Heather and Perry shared a look before they glanced up at Brendan, who was holding the gun stock a couple inches away from his shoulder, spitting in the face of Perry's safety briefing. The two of them rushed over to the jock like alarmed parents, and through much scolding and persuasion, convinced Brendan that he did not want a broken collarbone. I've had a broken collarbone twice in my life, and I can attest to not wanting to have a broken collarbone. It sucks. He's just all kinds of helpful, isn't he? His first hurdle was that none of the materials had their durability multiplied by the same amount. Each and every one of them had a vastly different multiplier. Plywood performed the best, but that was only because it was already significantly sturdier than most of the other materials. It blocked small arms fire, but nothing with any heft to it. The 7.6 rounds went right through. The math showed that it absorbed the same amount of punishment as the 17.199 layers of plywood. The next best was plexiglass, which blocked small arms as well, but took more damage in the process, absorbing 15.876 panels worth of force before breaking. Followed by plastic and aluminum cans, which stopped 22 rounds, but not much else. And dirt, which stopped a lot of things, but wasn't viable as a structural material, as it tended to crumble like dirt. As it had a tendency to crumble like dirt. But the interesting part was that the multiplier for these cheaper materials was higher. Plastic, 23.814, aluminum cans, 27.783, and dirt, 30.429. Perry subtracted the effect of his attunement from the result, which was 10.25%, and with a little finagling, found the common denominator was 12. Boy, he's better at math than I am. I would not be able to do that. So defensive and structural materials were increased by a flat 12 times, while each material's base effectiveness was upgraded on a case-by-case basis depending on some indecipherable combination of the item's rarity slash value slash effectiveness. Then at the end, the material's effectiveness was multiplied by his attunement. Basically, the spendthrift perk pulled double duty on cheap junk when it was used as armor. Interesting. Too bad the attunement isn't applied separately to each side of that before they are multiplied together. But frankly, that's probably asking a bit too much. Now that Perry had a good idea of the two numbers involved, he could start working on the reaction portion of the perk. Then, once that was done, he could start experimenting with actual spells. The reaction verifying was easy enough. All he had to do was look up some well-documented chemical reactions on YouTube and copy them identically, then measure the difference. The reaction in this case was a precise amount of vinegar and baking soda. Using a camera and a simple algorithm, he estimated that by following following the instructions exactly, he was able to generate a 10.25% stronger reaction with the same amount of chemicals. Essentially, only his attunement had any effect on all this at all on the strength of the outcome. How does that work? I'm wondering the same thing, dude. On a hunch, Perry began diluting the concentration of the reaction and realized that his perk wasn't strengthening the primary reaction, it was making the decrease in the strength of the reaction not follow the linear rate of dilution. This guy's too smart for me. Instead, it followed a logarithmic path, ignoring the 10.25% boost. The reaction maintained most of its effectiveness until it was roughly one-third the original amount of chemicals, after which it began to drastically diminish. Macronomicon, like, how? I'm clearly just dumb. This is like, how do you come up with all of this stuff? So, Perry frowned. So, basically homeopathy? He could use one-third of the required amount of any chemical diluted in order to generate the same reaction, and that number would continue getting smaller as his attunement rose. That's okay. So, yeah, thank you for that summary because that helped a lot in understanding this. I know I'm blazing through this, so yeah, I'll have to make sure that I can really understand what's happening. So when I'm narrating it, it makes more sense, not only to me, but the people who are having to listen to me. But yeah, that's interesting. So if he's diluting this by one-third, then his attunement is making it go back to its normal rate of potency. So therefore, he could be like using, I don't know if you use the cutting, like a cutting substance like water. So therefore, his actual chemical or whatever he needs less of, and he can produce more with the same potency. And that would be awesome. Okay. The fact that it raised the output at full concentration was only due to his attunement hijacking the function and pushing it above 100%, where it should have naturally stopped. So, if Spendthrift had any effect on magical reactions, then attunement alone would dictate stronger than natural magic reactions. Not 15 or 20 times stronger like the defensive materials, but there would be a boost if it worked. I can live with that. 100 attunement equals 131x power after all. 131x power after all. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Perry had to see if there was a noticeable difference between his prior experiment, pre-class, and a new creation, post-class. To test that, he had to make a new spell disc, as well as a new spell frame. Perry snuck out into the garage in the middle of the night and retrieved one of Terry's treat herrings. Terry's treat herrings. Terry's his octopus, if you guys don't remember. Then back into his room where the octopus immediately pressed itself against the glass, watching the fish with intensity. "All right, Terry," he said, brandishing his simple needle. "You know the drill." The octopus's eyes narrowed, but its gaze kept landing on the herring. The process was mostly painless, and in a matter of minutes, he had a needle full of nerve cells. After that, Perry began to sink into what was commonly called the tinker twitch. Time began to fly by as he tore the guts out of all the decommissioned computers littering his floor and began creating a house for the new spell disk. As he worked, the ideas flowed like a river. He was drowning and couldn't resurface if he wanted to. By the time he came back to his senses, there was a sleek square on the desk in front of him, about the size and shape of a floppy disk from the late 20th century. Anybody remember floppy disks? No. It was, in every way, better than his prototype, capable of keeping the nerve cells alive and fed indefinitely, given a modest supply of heat, electricity, or sun. So as long as he didn't stick it in the lightest lightest so as long as he didn't stick it in the lightless freezer or boiled it, it was shelf stable. Beside the disc was a much prettier version of his growth spell frame from last weekend, with a couple dozen upgrades that had sort of manifested while as he was putting things together, his mind hopping from idea to idea. Now the contraption had a smooth steel exterior. Now the contraption had a smooth steel exterior that almost looked like a metal ostrich egg, with a tiny hole where the puff of magic dust would be shot from. Fun, fun, fun. You 3D printed the save icon. That's awesome. All right, Perry thought, rubbing his eyes and suppressing a yawn as he hooked the two new contraptions up to his computer, aiming the hole at a new patch of clover he'd stolen from the lawn. Let's see whether this class was a waste of time. Grow, I'm going to have to get some how to do these. They're like program code things. Grow MKII or LL, possibly .exe. Perry thought he heard a whine immediately before a tiny puff of dust shot out of the egg-shaped spell frame, settling on the clover. Then the clover tried to grab him. Ah! Ah! Perry screamed and dove out of the way as the clover violently erupted out of the pot and shoved his computer tower off the desk. The screen went blank as the tower shut down, the cord yanked from the case. Then the clover conquered it, embedding roots in every inch of the motherboard and generally making a mess of things as it dropped off the edge of the desk, slowing down and stopping just before it hit the ground. Well, Perry said from where he stood on top of his bed, I think we can safely hypothesize that there is some sort of synergistic effect at play here. There was only one way to describe the reaction just now. Weapons grade. Perry rubbed his hands together in anticipation. Mwahaha. Now the fun part. I get to figure out the math. That's the fun part? Ooh, you and I have different ideas of fun. Brrr. Perry, sorry. Perry heard the sound of a big diesel engine. Wait a minute. Through his window, he spotted this school bus rolling past his street. Left, not right, meaning it was already on the way back to school. Shit, Perry said, scrambling off his bed. It's 7:45 already? Oh, no. Oh, my, the things you get up to when you're having fun. Well, good times here today, hey? So we have our new Tinker class, and we are figuring things out with it and testing out our limits, which is what you always do. And he's not doing it in the safest way possible, but, he's 17. What can we expect? Macronomicon, you've done it again. All right, so if you enjoyed this, make sure to grab the subscribe button and the notification to let you know whether when we're going to be doing this again. FYI, I will be back Monday morning at the same time, and we will be doing a little bit more reading, cold read of the Industrial Strength Magic by Macronomicon. Descriptions down below include Macronomicon's Patreon page, the Discord for Soundbooth Theater, and my own Discord where I live stream my recording sessions, which generally goes somewhat akin to what we're dealing with here. sort of. And yeah, I do that daily, and you can come and hang out with us as we record the books that we're working on. I am currently working on a book for Podium called The Dungeon of Pride. It is the Seven Deadly Demon series. This is book 3 in the series. We're having great fun with a lot of crazy characters in there. And we are also going to be having Macronomicon and I have teamed up again to do another series. I just completed book 1 of that series, Wake of the Ravager. The book 1 is called The Problem with Princesses, and it is fan-freaking-tastic. That should be coming out. I'm maybe towards the end of the year, possibly in the new year. Depends on when Podium has their release date set. And if you can't wait, then go and check out The Stitched Worlds by Macronomicon, recorded by me with Podium. The first book is called The Apocalypse System, and it is absolutely one of my favorites. It was how I was introduced to Macronomicon, and I fell in love. It was love at first reading. So yeah, all of that is available for you. I hope you have a great afternoon, weekend, and we will catch you again tomorrow. Bye for now.